Welcome to Holly's Pandorium, featuring your host, psychic medium Holly Jordan.
Hey everybody, this is Holly from Holly's Pandorium, and I am talking with a new guest today. This is Sage Gatto, and he is going to talk to us about a ghost team that he has and some paranormal stuff that I have not heard before, so I'm very excited. So welcome, Sage. I'm so glad you're here. It's
Thank
good to
you.
have you on the show.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So tell me, now I'm going to put something up here real quick for everybody that's watching online. Sage is the owner of the Steel City Ghost Chaser. So tell me about the Steel City Ghost Chasers. How did that get started?
Yeah, so I've been investigating the paranormal since 2019 officially. It's my first out and go, and did a little, couple small stuff before then, but like actually actively hitting the road. We started doing stuff around Pittsburgh in 2019, and during the pandemic in 2020, there wasn't anything to do, and my friends and I decided, you know what, let's just go out and explore places since you can still get into ghost hunt.
Right.
So bought a whole bunch of equipment, and a whole bunch of my buddies and I decided to go out and start investigating, and did a little bit of filming, just to see what we would capture. And next thing I mean, they don't go with me anymore, unfortunately, because they weren't all about the traveling. But now, I just basically take whoever wants to go with me, and we'll travel all over the place.
Nice. That sounds awesome. So can you tell us about your first experience with the paranormal? What was the first time you thought, wow, there's more out here than I thought there was?
Probably when I was a child, growing up. This is actually my grandfather's house I live in now. He unfortunately just passed at the end of February, but
Oh, I'm sorry.
when I was a kid, coming here to visit, he he was always by himself because my grandma passed before I was born. And I remember, like, my brother and I would always like get really strange feelings, like someone's watching us, or like someone is just around. And you always have that, like, the hair just goes up on your arm, like, oh, so someone's near. Never really understood,
Right.
what was going on, and that actually is what inspired me to kind of be more in tune with the paranormal, watching the TV shows, and eventually now out and about traveling and investigating. And was the actual first documented thing I ever captured was actually in the house when I bought my first spirit box, and I was in the house and I turned it
Wow.
on, and I was like, I didn't know what I was doing. It was right when I first started. And I
Mhm.
just asked if my grandma was there, and all of a sudden a voice came through saying her name in her voice. And I was just like mind blown. I was like, oh my God, this is real.
Right? Oh my god, that must have been incredible.
Yeah, it sent chills up and down every bit of my body, but also at the same time, I was like, okay, this is cool. This confirms everything my whole life. So,
Right? That's amazing.
yeah.
So, is your primary focus about ghost investigations, or do you hunt other things, or what have you been around? What have you been exposed to so far?
Done a little bit of, I mean, some stuff. I did a little bit of urban exploring, mostly ghost hunting based, but I unintentionally ran into a UFO sighting out in the woods, and exploring an old mining complex. That was very interesting. Aside from that, like, just learning about stuff through, the internet, and, watching Bigfoot stuff and UFO stuff, because it always piques my interest of what else is out there. But
Right.
as far as an investigator, I've just been out in the woods, explored, that mining complex, and after that UFO encounter, that
Mhm.
was enough to kind of like spook me. I'm like, you know what, maybe this isn't for me. I'm gonna stick to my old asylums and hospitals. So,
Right, I get that. So, how tell us about that UFO experience. What was that like for you?
oh
What did
boy,
you see?
it was it was something I've never experienced before, so I didn't know exactly what I was experiencing, to be honest with you, until I saw it, like, very close. We were try to best way I can explain. There's a walking trail that goes right down through the woods, and there's a very slight downgrade, very minor hill down to like the old building, so the mining complex. And we were in the main building, and just sitting there with some ghost hunting equipment set up. And I remember my one friend had his yes no device set up, and had some REM pods set up, and whatnot, just kind of just chilling and not really doing anything, just trying to see what would happen if we see anything. And we just started hearing this humming noise, almost sounded like an electric motor from like a scooter or an electric car of some sort. And we all looked at each other and went, "What is that noise? And why are we hearing it coming down the trail at 11 o'clock at night?" I was like, "That's a good question." I was like, "Why are we
Right,
hearing?"
right.
And about probably 30 seconds later, it started getting louder. And we're like, this is really strange. Like, is someone riding a scooter? Like, what's going on? And eventually we saw a light coming down the trail through the trees. And at first it just looked like a ball of light. But as it got closer, it looked like a giant wheel. And it was a giant circle, and it was round and turning counterclockwise. And I remember it had about 12 individual holes in it, like around it, that looked like LED light bulbs, but they weren't emitting any shadows or casting any light off of it, but were lit up. And
Wow.
those were what were like spinning around this giant like wheel like structure. And we all looked at each other because as it got closer and we were able to physically see like every detail of it, all of our equipment started going off and malfunctioning. And the yes no device was like, like doing something I've never seen it do. And the REM pods were like just were flashing but not going off.
Wow.
And we like looked at each other like, what is happening? Like you can just feel like the energy just being off. And it like
Right.
kind of hovered near us real quick, and it's almost like someone flipped a switch and it just disappeared into thin air.
So it was above you?
No, it was
You
it was on the it was actually on the walking trail, but
It was
we were
oh,
down a minor hill. It was like eye level with us, but it was on the
okay.
trail. Yeah, it literally like, came up and like kind of slowed, came to a stop, and just went gone.
So do you feel like it was close to you, or do you feel like it was just watching you from a distance?
Um, I mean, we watched it eye to eye, like right in front of us. No more than 100 feet, 200 feet from us.
So how big did it look like to you?
It was probably at least 4 foot tall, 4.5
Okay.
foot tall, maybe a little bit taller than that. It was hard to tell from like because we were below it. But
Okay.
I mean, as it got closer and I was like looking right on with it, that's when you can really see it. Starting to like how it was like rotating like this at this speed. And you could
Interesting.
see how it was lit up, but it wasn't casting a shadow and lighting up everything around it, but it was lit up. And that's when
So
we were like, whoa.
so what you're describing to me sounds like so if it was a pizza, it was facing you, it wasn't flat.
Correct. It was facing
That's
us like upright with the
incredible.
wheel.
Wow.
Yep, and like I said, like it started off as like a real light hum to the point where it was like, and we're like, "What is that noise? And what is going
Honey,
on?"
wow.
Yeah, and then
That's
like I said,
intense.
someone flicked a switch and gone. And then we
So
all
you
looked at each other like, "Did you see that, or am I going nuts?"
so I'm guessing since it was a mining area, you went there hoping to hear ghost things and
Yeah,
see ghost things. So that was
yeah,
not on the menu. You weren't thinking about that stuff at all.
correct. Yeah, because the history there it's called the Dar Mine. It was one of the worst mining accidents that ever happened in American history, and actually was the reason why a lot of the current and more recent safety guidelines were created for miners was because of this accident in the early 1900s. The mine they were didn't really have any safety stuff, and something
Mhm.
happened. The mine exploded and killed 400 something people, including
Oh,
kids and their parents and whatnot that were all there. And
wow.
it was a terrible disaster. And because of that, that's why they now have what we know today for mining. And we went there to see if any of those people are still lingering, because nobody really knows about it other than the historical marker on the side of the road that's not even near it.
Really?
Um, so we decided to go out and see if we can encounter any ghosts or contact anybody that's still there, and end up running into a UFO instead.
Wow, that must have been really shocking. Well, yeah, because I would expect that's a lot of people to pass at the same time in
Yeah,
one spot.
yeah,
That's a huge tragedy.
yep.
That's incredible.
Crazy because you can still go to like the coal chute and find there's still coal laying around and stuff. So
Wow.
yeah, it's something. I would love to go back sometime, but after seeing that, I'm like, no, I don't know. Maybe during the day.
Maybe oh, yeah, I was gonna say maybe earlier in the day when it's a little lighter out,
Yep.
you know? Gosh, that's incredible. That is really incredible. So, you've definitely seen a UFO by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
Have you ever experienced anything like a dog man or a Bigfoot? Has that ever been around you?
Um, I've heard noises in the woods. That's about as close as I can get to that. I couldn't quite distinguish. There's a we kind of thought maybe in the skinwalker region of things because I know they can shapeshift to different animals to draw you in. And
Mhm.
we were hearing some really odd howling coming. Actually, ironically, the same night that we saw the UFO,
Really?
we thought maybe it was like a coyote or something. But the more we listened to it, it was like, well, there's no houses around, and that's certainly not a dog. And the more we listen to her, that doesn't sound like a coyote or any kind of how we're used to.
Right.
And we're also there trying to figure it out. And like in my mind, being intuitive, I just heard not human. I said, okay, guys, I think it's time to leave. I just something's telling me we need to leave because I don't feel safe anymore.
Honestly, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I think that's the number one thing that most ghost researchers have in common is somebody's intuitive. Somebody can hear things or sense things.
Yeah.
And being clairaudient, if you hear things, tell you information, I don't second guess that. I know that that's for a reason. And when I hear stuff like that, you get a feeling. It's not just the sound or the word or the sense. You get like a whole bunch of auditory things going on.
Yep.
It just as real as if you were to go to a pizza parlor and they say your order's ready. You smell it, you're excited, you're going to have a pizza. There's all these things that happen at once. And it's like when you hear something that's alarming, that goes through your whole body. It's like that's a full experience going on. So if you heard not human and you're in a strange place, that would be very unsettling. So that's incredible. That's incredible.
Especially after witnessing the UFO and everything, we were already like, what's going on here? And then we started hearing like really strange howling and like stuff I've never heard before coming from the woods. That's when I was kind of starting to get, like itchy to be like, guys, maybe we should,
Yeah. Maybe it's time to like, yeah.
Absolutely. It was something I'll never forget and something I'm not too sure I want to experience again, but also at the same hands, like, did that really happen? If it only happened once, like maybe I should go try again, but
I think that's a totally valid point, because I know people that have never experienced anything on the paranormal tend to think, oh, you're making it up or you're exaggerating. But the truth is, everyone that's an experiencer that I've talked to says the same thing. You second guess the crap out of yourself. You're always saying, did I hear that? Did I see that? Did I feel that? Did I sense this right? And then you have to go, no, I know what I saw. Yep. I know what I heard.
Exactly.
But we all have self-doubts about that because it isn't our normal. It's not what we're used to hearing and seeing. Right. So that's incredible. So tell me, how did you come up with the name Steel City? Where did that come from?
So Steel City is a common term used around Pittsburgh for the steel mills. We were very prominent steel industry, and back in the mid 1900s, prior to that, even from the foundation of the city, we're all right. What is now downtown Pittsburgh was at one point in time all steel mills, and out in like some of the suburb areas out when that's current Homestead and Waterfront, that was all steel mills, and it was all immigrants and whatnot, and it was you couldn't even go downtown. It was just smog and smokestacks everywhere because everywhere you looked was steel mills, and that's how we came to get the nickname Steel City. And that just kind of, I like using it because it's a lot easier and a little bit more different than just saying oh, I'm from Pittsburgh, or doing something with the area code or whatever.
Right. So I see that you're wearing a Ghost Mob t-shirt. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so Ghost Mob was actually the TV show I was just recently a part of, thanks to my good friends Chris Smith and Mike Gonsalves of the Tennessee Wraith Chasers. They now just go by the Wraith Chasers out of Tennessee. They're absolutely fantastic humans. I actually got to meet them for the very first time out at Rolling Hills Asylum in 2021. And I went out to one of their public events. And at the time, I'm nervous because, like, I've watched Chris's TV shows. I've known about them, since I was a kid. I watched Ghost Asylum. I watched Haunted House in high school. Like, I was nervous to meet them because, like, they're like, my celebrity crush, if you will.
Sure.
And I was just like freaking out. I was like, "What's this gonna be like?" I've never ghosted with anybody that's been on TV before. I've never before. I've been to events, but not like this. Like, I was like a million thoughts, And we pull up, and Chris just walks out and just introduces himself to everybody. I'm like, oh my god, it's happening! Like, this is real. And we go inside, and they had a table set up, and they were doing meet and greets and signing autographs and stuff. And I walk up, and Chris saw my shirt. Goes, oh, I remember filming at Hillview Manor. I remember that place. And I was like, yeah. I was like, that's just north of me. And I go there all the time. And next, we're talking for 20 minutes. It's like I've known him my whole life.
Nice.
Him and his brother Brandon and Mike were there, and we were all talking and joking around and laughing. And I looked at my ex. I was there at the time, and I was just like, that was so cool. I was like, that was surreal.
Right.
they were set up around the building, and we got to investigate with them. And I went to probably, I think, maybe 7 events of theirs since. And I was out in Jefferson City, Missouri at
Mhm.
the end of 2022. I think it was 22. Yeah, because 22 or 23. I can't remember now, to be honest with you. It was 23. And Mike pulled me aside and said, "Hey, we're getting an idea together of a new project that we're going to put out on TV and stuff. Would you want to be a part of it?" I was like, what?"
Yeah.
I was like, "Absolutely."
Yeah.
So I ended up being asked to be part of Ghost Mob. And other than just the name and where we were filming, we really didn't know much of it at the time. But eventually, the project came to be where they took 10 different people to 4 different locations, and
Nice.
they paired everybody with like people that kind of were like polar opposites of each other. So like the gentleman I was with, he is twice my height, and he's my parents' age, and he has no equipment. He's what we call a minimalist, and he just wants to experience stuff. So they thought putting me with having every piece of equipment known to mankind with him, we might be able to work on each other, and
Sure.
he use the equipment to capture and experience stuff, but also the same hand I can maybe learn from him with how he does things with no equipment,
Mhm.
and it
That's
worked
very
out
true.
perfectly.
That sounds amazing. That sounds like a really good experience.
Yeah, it
So
was.
you went to how many locations did you go to?
With them, we only filmed at one location, just my group, but they took 10 different people to 4 locations. They're having issues. We were originally filming for Prime Video,
Mhm.
and right when they first started trying to upload, they were having issues with their closed captioning. Then they were having issues with the licensing, and they wanted everything out by the springtime of last year, and they weren't able to get our episode out until July. And that was when we had our premiere, because it was kind of cool. We all knew it was coming. They were dropping trailers, say Ghost Mob coming to Prime Video, and we had a video put out of all of our interviews, introducing us. And everyone's like, "Well, when's the show come out?" I'm like, that's a good question, because I haven't even heard anything. So I shot Mike a message. I was like, "What's going on?" And
Right.
he's like, "Oh, we're having issues with the Prime Video. We're trying to get it straightened out." I was like, these poor guys, like, they've talked about wanting to have like multiple seasons, so they could have had the whole season out by now. But
Right.
here we are, still waiting for the first episode because of Prime. And
Yeah.
eventually it came out for 99 cents on Prime Video, and we actually had our premiere at St. Albans Sanitarium, where we filmed. And
Nice.
it was pretty creepy going back to where we filmed and watching our episode and the location. It was creepy, but it was
So
an
can you
experience.
tell us about that location a little bit? What
Yeah.
was that like?
Oh boy. St. Albans is one of the heaviest hitting locations I've personally ever been to. I've been there only a couple of times before, and both times I got stuck with Chris and Mike in the bowling alley. So I never got to see the whole building, and I think that there's a reason to that, and I'm gonna keep it like that, because the building is not fun at all.
Yeah.
It dates back, like the land, because being a medium yourself, you understand with the land, the energy attaches to the land.
Yep.
Well, it was Native American land first, and there was
Mhm.
a massacre that took place on the land back in the 1760s,
Ooh.
between George Washington's troops and Native Americans.
Oh dear.
um they're still there. There's, I think, we learned that there were 6 of them. Me and my other good friends, a really good medium, she was the one that like started pulling the dirt up on it, and we just ran with it. We learned that there's 6 of them there, and he's actually the prominent spirit of the bowling alley. He goes by Red Eyes. He doesn't it's not anything demonic or anything scary. He just That's what people call him. That's what he goes by. And I asked him during our episode, "Do you want to be called something else?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Well, what do you want to be? What do you want to be called then?" He never told me. So
Oh.
Red Eyes it is.
Yeah.
Um, but then, after the 1700s, there was Civil War activity that took place on the land. There was from what I understand from historians that told me, there's a minor battle that took place there between um, Confederate cavalry and Union infantry, and up on the hill where St. Albans sits, there was a Union battery that sat up there. Um, I have to do more research on that. I don't know much, which I'm ashamed of, because I'm a Civil War nut. That's my cup of tea.
Mhm.
But there was that. And then right after the war is when it became a Lutheran boys' school in the late 1800s,
Mm-hmm.
and it was mostly made to be a prestigious school, but it was not the bestly run, and the older kids were bullying the younger kids, causing some to kill themselves. There was even a couple
Oh,
murders that took place there. Um, and it was, a gruesome place, somewhere I personally would never want to send my kid to, but that's just how it was. And not long after the school, it was bought by a Dr. King and made into a hospital. And I know they treated tuberculosis patients there at one point. And as its years went on, it became almost like an outpatient center, like a private
mhm.
hospital, and they treated psychiatric patients. And they had electric shock therapy, hydroshock therapy. I'm trying to think of what else. It wasn't a good place at all. There was a lot of death, a lot of mistreatment of people there.
A
Uh,
lot of trauma for
yeah,
over 100 years,
yeah,
200 years possibly of
yeah.
trauma there. Wow.
You just have layer after layer after layer of trauma and abuse and everything you can imagine there. One of the big stories there was one of the patients. We're not too sure if she was taken advantage of by a staff member or if she was pregnant prior to coming in, but she was pregnant, had a miscarriage, and couldn't handle the burden of losing her child. So she kept it in a jar and hid it in the closet because she didn't want to lose her child, and
Oh,
one of the orderlies ended up finding it, and she ended up killing herself in the bathroom. And
oh,
the story is that there was, I think they said 5 people killed themselves in that bathroom, so now it's nicknamed the suicide bathroom. And that area of the building is extremely heavy, especially for females and parents. If you're a mom, that's not an area I recommend going to. Everyone
wow.
there. She lets herself know and be known, and she always shows herself to the moms and lets them feel what she did. And every time it gets worse and worse. It's
Wow. That's
anyone
intense.
talking about it's not an easy place to go to.
No, clearly not. Well, it's probably a good thing and so you said you were in a bowling alley?
Yeah. So when they had a hospital there, they had a bowling alley in the basement.
Wow.
Don't ask me why. It's strange. It doesn't fit. But where the bowling alley is kind of secluded to the rest of the building. You're downstairs in a basement that's its own area. So there's no contamination to the rest of the room. There's no contamination to upstairs, anywhere. You're in your own area. So when you start hearing things bang and move around above you, that's not a human, because it's like we best way I can explain is when we were filming, we were down there for an hour and a half and getting just ridiculous amounts of activity. And we kept hearing like tables being drug across the ground, like that really, distinct, dragging noise. And then
Sure.
we kept hearing bangs, like stuff was getting thrown. And we kept hearing voices and chanting, and, then more dragging and bangs. And we're like, what are they doing upstairs, or what is going on? Because this is ridiculous. And when the cameraman actually said, "Yeah, hey, let me go up and tell them to, calm down," if the other
Mhm.
cast members were, running about or whatever, and he went up to find them all huddled around a heater in the corner, not even moving.
Oh,
So he came back down and told us, and we're like, "So what did we hear before?"
wow. So
It's kind of like starting to really question, like,
yeah.
"Oh,
Yeah.
what's going on here?" You
I
know,
would have imagined there was a morgue in the basement, not a bowling alley.
Yeah, it's the setup at St. Albans is strange. I understand maybe it's something for the patients, to do for fun. They're at the hospital, maybe whatever. But
Right.
it's a strange area. I don't. It's very very active. Like that's where Red Eyes is prominent.
Hmm.
So almost our whole investigation was tailored around him down there.
Mhm.
Um, and once when he like kind of warms up to you, he'll communicate with you. But if you're just some new person and comes down there and just starts yelling and blabbing whatever, he gets angry and people don't listen. So he'll have outbursts, and that's where people think that he's a demon or whatever, because he likes to get physical with you if you're not taking it
Mm.
seriously and not paying attention.
Right.
But if you respect him, he respects you.
Yeah.
So it's a place where I don't recommend first timers going,
Right.
unless they're with people that been and know what they're doing, because you can get seriously harmed there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's good advice. because when people are first getting into researching the paranormal, they're not just newbies. They have not seen or heard what can happen, and watching it on television is nothing like being in the room.
Exactly. And,
It's
you
not
might
the
go
same.
on and say, most haunted locations of the state and see it pop up like, oh, I've heard there. I'm going to go there. Yeah, you might want to go there, but I would get some experience under your belt first because every location, hits differently. I was, pretty fortunate to learn everything at Hillview Manor, which is a just about as equally haunted location just north of Pittsburgh.
Mhm.
And, I've been there probably close to 20, 30 times now. And every single time it's like almost the same stuff that happens, same level of activity. And it just never ceases to amaze me and how active that building stays.
So can you tell us about Hillview Manor and tell us about what you see when you go there?
Yeah, Hillview Manor is fun. It was an old nursing home and poor farm back in the day, a county home. And nowadays it's sits as one of the most haunted locations in Pennsylvania. It closed in the early 2000s. Like it was 2004 to be exact. I had to double check the history on that. But it was not run well at the beginning like any county home would be.
Right.
I think that goes without saying.
Mhm.
Um, and then eventually was sold. Well, not sold. They were the caretakers were kicked out, and new people were put in, and it became Hillview Manor from the county home, and then it turned into more of like a hospice center, assisted living, kind of ordeal. And it remained that until the another facility that was bigger and better was built not far down the road, and unfortunately that's what caused the building to close.
Oh, wow.
And the original, from what I was told from the owners, not wasn't long after it closed that local ghost hunters were knocking on the door saying, hey, I heard this place was haunted, can we come in? And they're like, sure. Mind you, this is 2005, 2006 when, the TV shows were just popping off and
Right.
this was all new to everybody. So they were kind of like, sure. And, the rest became history. It was on Ghost Adventures, Ghost Hunters, you know, Paranormal Lockdowns and film there. And a Ghost Asylum was there. There's probably been 15 TV shows that have filmed there now. Something like
Wow.
that. So anybody that's a avid TV fan knows the name Hillview Manor from one show or another. It's pretty cool to say that, it's an hour for me and I go there a lot because not too many people can go to places that you see on TV, frequently.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's been cool. And things you'll hear there, your disembodied voices, screaming, whistling. Um, Sometimes you'll hear laughter and because there was kids there too. So you'll hear little kids laughing.
Mhm.
Gurneys rolling down the hallways when there's nothing there. So one thing I like is you'll hear the elevator ding, even though the elevator's out of commission and doesn't work.
That's awesome.
That it's creepy when if you're there on a night where there's nobody there and you just kind of just sit and listen. Sometimes you'll hear ding. You're like, what was that? And then it all comes to your mind like, oh yeah, it's the elevator. Huh?
Right.
Not even plugged in, doesn't even work, doesn't have power, but can ding. That's fun.
Right.
I've seen full bodied apparitions there with my own eyes. I've captured full bodied apparitions there. Um, there's a not so friendly spirit that likes to lurk in the one hallway that you can't get into. It's a staircase that they keep closed. We call him the gatekeeper. He will mess with you and will sometimes pick on you. I actually had my doppelganger captured in the basement at Hillview, and we believe it to be the gatekeeper trying to show himself as me to be funny.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, I'll have to send you that picture sometime. It was real.
Yeah.
But to explain it to everybody, we were down there in the original maintenance room, or one of the original maintenance rooms is off to the left. And the guy, the spirit down there, his name's George. He was the maintenance worker, and he's a big Pittsburgh fan. So anytime you're down there, you gotta talk anything Steelers or Pirates or anything Pittsburgh related, and he'll love you. Uh,
Nice.
so I was actually trying to set up a piece of equipment in his room, and I was fighting with the audio and the sound on it, whatnot. And I saw a flash behind me. My friend took a picture, straight down the hallway. And I just hear, Sage, please tell me you're in the hallway. And I'm like, what the hell is he talking about? So I peek out the doorway and I look down the hallway. I'm like, what? And the second he saw me poke out of the doorway, he ran. I'm like, what's bro running for? Like, what's going on? So like I chased after him. I was like, why are you running? And he goes, you're not gonna believe this. So I was like, what? He pulled up his camera and zoomed in, and sure enough, there's a figure that looks like me standing right there in the hallway.
Oh my gosh.
Hey, look at that.
Wow. That is incredible.
It was funny because I was wearing one of their jackets, and
Okay.
you can see the square outline, and you can very faintly see
Right.
the building because it was blurry.
Oh,
And then you can
funny.
see my blue jeans, but my legs almost looked like, almost like pillars.
Okay.
And then the hat I was wearing was one of my pirate hats that has reflector strips that go down it, like like any baseball hat.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
only two of them are glowing, on the hat, like like a
Oh my gosh.
I guess a backward C shape you can call those. I don't know how to explain
Wow.
those. But you can see the either reflector strips, and you can see my jacket and pants, from the back of me facing him. But when you look at my head, it's just like a blurry square, like there's no head there. But you can see like
Wow.
my hat, jacket, and jeans, and it wasn't me that was standing there. It
No
was
wonder he ran. Oh my god.
yeah, I had no idea. Why are you running?
Yes. What did I do to scare you?
Yeah,
That's incredible.
yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I've had another incredible thing that's happened down there. I had my camera actually get displaced off of a tripod and broken down there.
Oh.
That was the only time I've ever witnessed poltergeist. Well, the first time I should say that I've witnessed poltergeist activity. We were I was just sitting there watching it because I had my camcorder up on a tripod, just
Mhm.
shooting straight down that same hallway, and we were all standing in like a 3/4 moon shape around it, so we
Mhm.
weren't blocking the camera, but we were all like away from it, and I
Right.
was behind it, so I'm like kind of watching the screen, making sure it's on, still running, everything's good to go, and out of nowhere, I watched like I don't know how to explain this to people who aren't familiar with tripod. So you have like the mount piece, and it's like a C clamp, backward C clamp that
Right.
attaches the mount to the actual tripod. Well, I
Okay.
watched that C clamp part in my camera lift up off the tripod and dump and fall straight down onto the ground, and it broke because it fell with some force, like something picked it up and threw it. And I just had to watch.
How could that even happen?
And everyone turned around like, I didn't touch it. I didn't touch it. I was like, I know you didn't touch it. I just watched it.
Wow.
I was
That's
amazed
insane.
because I've never seen something like that with my own eyes, let alone right in front of me. But rightfully so, I was upset because I just lost a $150 camera.
Well,
But
yeah, but
yeah,
still equally, I mean, so did you actually get video of that happening by chance?
I tried seeing if I could salvage like the video of it, but it for whatever reason it didn't capture. It stopped
Darn.
recording.
Yeah.
Uh,
Wow.
I've had weird phenomena like that happen before. At a later date, another location in Ohio where I had a voice recorder and camera running at the same time, and then we left the building, and then I came back and cut both of them. And when I went to review it, the camera only recorded for 15 minutes, but my voice recorder recorded the whole time.
Interesting.
And they were both running when I started them, and they were still running when I got there. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Wow.
I
Wow.
guess the only ones I know why is the big man upstairs and the spirits of that building because nobody was there. We weren't even in the building, so no idea.
So have you had experiences where batteries go dead on you unexpectedly?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, they love they some spirits. It's more so the spirits that are familiar with me, more
Mhm.
so than spirits that aren't, because I feel like the spirits that aren't are like kind of at like the end of the circle for say. They're looking at you, they're wanting to communicate with you, but they don't know how to. Where the spirits I'm familiar with know how to mess with me, so they know, be like, haha, watch this. I'm like, what? Why just charge this? It's happened a couple of times. I had just bought an SLS camera at the time, brand new battery, just charged. Everything was just fully charged. I double checked it, triple checked it even. Put it all together, turned it on, and started walking down a hallway, and it died. And I was like, guys, I just spent $500 on this. I just got to my very first location with it, and you decide to kill the battery. Are you kidding?
Right. Right.
I've had batteries die in, millimeters and REM pods before just after replacing them. That's not as common, but it's had happen. Camera batteries usually die quicker. Those are usually the ones that they like. I think my theory on that is they kill the camera batteries because they don't want to be seen.
Mm.
So if you're recording video and you're just walking down the hallway and your camera battery dies, there's more than likely a spirit that's walking either right in front of you or near you, crossing the hallway or something, and they didn't want to be seen, so they had your battery killed. That's a theory I have. I don't. It's kind of hard to prove, but
No, it's a good theory. It really is. What I have found is that okay, so a human body has a soul in it, in my opinion, and our brain makes electricity, and so does our heart. And
right.
so when we lose that power generating that we are used to,
Yep.
it's been my experience that spirits a lot of times like to grab energy from batteries because they're easier to get to.
Right.
There's legends of a few different ghosts along highways all across America and in Europe where someone died on a freeway or they died on a highway from some circumstance. And so they haunt those areas and they are known to drain even a car battery
Oh my.
just to get energy.
Right.
And so I actually have something that I've suggested to other teams, and maybe this will help you
Mhm.
guys. I suggest bringing like a motorcycle battery,
Okay.
charge it up, and just recharge it before you go out and put it in the middle of where you're at and say, "This is for you. You guys can get all the energy you want from this. Please leave the gear alone,"
Right.
and see what happens.
Do you think the EM pumps help with that too? I see a lot of sites that sell those.
I don't know. I haven't worked with those myself, but I know that they're in order for them to communicate with us at all, whether it's to materialize and show themselves or to,
Mhm.
audibly communicate, in a psychic way or whatever, they need energy to do all of that. And if they haven't been eating energy from somewhere or digesting it or storing it, they don't have much. And
Right.
so that's one of the reasons why, like, when I talk with newbies, I try to explain, first of all, when you're going to ask questions of a spirit, keep it concise. Make it
Right.
very basic. Make it a question that they can answer with a yes or no, simply, and don't rapid fire questions. You've got to give them time to answer you, because as an old psychic, what I've learned is that spirits that haven't spoken to a human in a long time sometimes lose the communication skills. They have real
Right.
trouble talking. They'll get it back, but you got to give them time,
Yep.
and they will start talking. They communicate with each other differently than they do with us.
Right.
And so there's communication between them all the time, but that takes energy. Everything they do takes energy. So if you can give them something to take energy from, then yeah, they'll go for it. But
Yep.
batteries are easy for them to drain, and that just refuels them so they can do other things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. A lot of people don't think about that. Everyone gets mad. I'm like, well, that's why you bring like 20 batteries. So one
Mhm.
dies, pop a new one in.
Right. Yeah.
Definitely
Absolutely.
good advice. I've had abilities, ever since I was a kid, because like feeling stuff. But I kind of learned that from talking to other mediums and like kind of growing myself that, though I am intuitive, it's more of an energy based, ability. I do give, readings to people, but my readings are more so based off of energy.
Mhm.
And I can connect with loved ones and spirits that are connected to you. If I'm going goes like to a location, I can tell like what's connected with the location before I even go.
Right.
Uh, Sometimes more so than others, but I usually get a rough idea. But like I can't like tell the future, and it's like some people like be like, oh, you're gonna have a good this tomorrow. I'm like okay,
Mm.
that's wild, but
Right.
it's something I've kind of learned to use as a blessing as well, because I help people with spiritual healing and pulling negative energy from places, and also use the ability to help spirits as well, because it's to me, ever since I like was real gung ho starting out, like wanting to prove that what I saw on TV is real,
Right.
kind of transition to be like, well, why are they here? Are they forced here, or do they want to move on, or just stuck here? Like, what's causing them to be here?
Right.
And that kind of what helps shift the way I do things on investigations is, let them come to me and talk to me. And if they say, hey, I'm just here, I like it here, I want to talk, great. Sometimes spirits will come to us and say, I want to move on. Can you help me? And
Right.
whether or not, it's accepted or not, like I'm not letting the spirit suffer.
Right.
I'll either get them out of the building and let them decide on their own, or get them out of the building and then help them move on. One way or another will help them.
Right. That's awesome.
It's a great thing, and it's been very emotional. There's been times where the whole group's broken down into tears, based off what's happened.
Yeah.
I personally been heavily affected. As I mentioned before, I'm a huge history nerd, so I've grown up loving the Civil War, World War II, all that. I spent a lot of time in Gettysburg. It's only a couple hours from my house, and one thing I learned in my ability is, everyone always freaks out about attachments, but I welcome soldiers with me because having a military family, like, I understand the trauma of battle and what it could do to the soul.
Right.
And I'll sit on the battlefields and just take it all in, but also welcome any of them that want to talk. And it's not like people, like, always talk about, like, oh, Gettysburg's the most haunted place in America, and everyone's always showing up with their stuff, and trying to be sneaky and ghost hunt. I'm like, guys, like, it's not about the ghosts, like, it's about the history. Like, you got to respect them too.
Right.
So I always pay my respects and visit some monuments that I'm connected to, either ancestors or some of the soldiers I've met, and just kind of like spend time with them. And I've now communicated with, I think my list is over 100 soldiers now, give or take.
Nice.
My good friend that lives in Indiana will help me, and we'll connect with the spirit, and because she's intuitive as well. They'll tell her name, their name, because I struggle with getting names, but I can at least get the ball rolling. Then
Right.
the name and what I found out, and cross-reference it with the national database, and find their entire military profile from
Nice.
where they lived, who they where they fought, who they fought for, down to like every detail. And it kind of gives a different perspective to me, because not only am I communicating with the spirit, but like, I'm proving that this was a real person and that this isn't made up, because I looking at their profile that they just told me about
Right.
my computer. So it's very heartwarming. It's very emotional. And there's been times that, like, I go out and buy relics, bullets and cannonball fragments and whatnot.
Right.
They attach themselves to that too. And I'll come home and meet new ones and
Right.
go through them. And it brings me to tears almost every time, because it's just hard to believe that these people went through all this.
It is incredible. And there's a lack of understanding, I think, because of the generational gaps, that people don't realize how little we understood back in the day. Battle fatigue,
Yep.
now known as PTSD.
Yep.
There was a lot of trauma that people experienced in enormous levels. I mean, insurpassable. I have a spirit that actually showed up. I do seances on Sunday nights.
Okay.
And I had a spirit last year that came to me and said she had a friend spirit
Yeah.
that had been in the military, and that they had these great conversations and they talked for hours. And then once in a while he would have what she called an episode. She died in the 1950s, and she wasn't sure what time he lived in, because he couldn't really pin it down.
Yeah.
But every now and again he would get stormy, is what she called it, or have an episode. And he would get on a horse. He was part of the cavalry, clearly.
Yeah.
And he would run this horse back and forth and yell, and with a sword in his hand, and some kind of battle thing going on for him. And he finally showed up the other night. And when we're off camera, I'm going to give you his name, and maybe you can help me find him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
Yeah, certainly.
this poor guy has been traumatized forever. He's been reliving this experience, and he loves the area that he was in. He loves, so he stayed there.
Yeah.
And he's made friends with the other spirits that inhabit the area, clearly.
Yeah.
But he's still suffering. So I talked to him a little bit about PTSD, and he calmed down a lot. He was just being understood, and having somebody acknowledge that he had something he was dealing with was huge.
Yep. And even us just talking to them is huge. I noticed some places you go to, it's almost uneasy, because it's almost like the battle's still going on. But once you get to talk to them, and you kind of so for me, I feel like I'm a little on the bias side of things, because I do past life stuff as well. I don't know if you do those. But I always wondered why I was obsessed with the war and things as a kid, because I was adopted after birth. I have no record of my birth parents. I have no record of my ancestors. Anything,
Mhm.
anything I learned is all through spirit communication and
Okay.
research. And I found out that in my past life, I was apparently a Confederate officer somewhere in the Army of the Tennessee. And when I started like kind of getting on the building blocks, I was like, okay, I'm learning more, I'm learning more, learning more. Then all of a sudden it just like it just hit a plateau. I'm like, I can't figure out what's new. And when I go to these places, I feel like they still see me as a soldier, and that's why they flock to me. But also the same hand, they also know that I have 100 some other guys that like to, travel sometimes. So they probably
Word
see them.
word travel, Sage. When you become familiar, you become familiar to spirits.
Yeah,
They know. First of all, you can hear them more clearly. Your clairaudience is very finely tuned,
yeah,
so your ability to hear them is fun for them.
yeah,
They're like, "Oh, wow, they can hear me."
yeah,
It's like that. I'm sure you've seen that cartoon where a little boy is talking to a ghost just
yeah,
one-on-one, and the ghost says, "Oh, you can hear me," and the next caption is there's a room full of ghosts and the little boy standing there like,
yeah,
"Oh, crap," because there's all these ghosts around him talking. And
yep,
I'm sure you have that experience is my
yep.
point, is it? Because I do too. They get so excited that they can talk to somebody.
Yeah, because I can't physically see them eye to eye. I mean, sometimes I'll see a shadow or two.
Right.
Like, I'm more in tune with like energy. Like I'll feel the energy shift and pull. I'm like, okay, you're standing right here. I
Right.
feel like, okay, you're right here. Like I just know.
Right.
Um, it's funny when I sit down on the battlefields because I know they're around me. And I start looking out that it's just like you could feel like just a wave. And I'm like, holy crap,
Mhm.
guys. but
But it's great.
well,
And for them, you don't realize, honestly, Sage, how priceless that is to them.
yeah.
Being acknowledged is
Yeah.
huge. It's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I've been pretty fortunate. I've gotten to do think 14 battlefields now across the east out here. Everywhere from Gettysburg, all the way out to Vicksburg, Mississippi. I was fortunate to be able to go there.
Wow.
Um, I've done a lot of places in Virginia, some smaller battles, big battles. Been out to Tennessee, and it's interesting to see how similar but different all the battles were. But like you
Yeah.
said, them becoming familiar, we were after one of our battlefield trips, my best friend and I went on FaceTime, and what we like to do is when we connect our energies, we'll just sit down and turn on a spirit box, or she'll just open up a notebook and just kind of we'll open up our energies and let them communicate through us. And we'll say, okay, the session's open. Whoever wants to talk, start talking. She'll start, writing stuff down or whatever, and we'll turn on the spirit box, see who comes through. And one night, the spirit said, that he was, with me, and I said, okay, well, what's your name? And we started writing down the names or whatever, and cross-referenced, found out that he was a captain when he was killed at the battle. It was Malvern Hill in Virginia. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. I found that he was buried in South Carolina still, where he's from, and found his grave on Find a Grave and whatnot. And then I looked at my friend. I said, wait a second, I haven't been to Malvern Hill. How did he find me? I was like, I'm curious. I said, how did how did you find me? How did you know of me? And he was a traveler. I guess one of the guys went and found him and brought him here
Yes.
or something or whatever. And he just showed up at my house.
So I'm going to tell you something that I haven't shared on this before
Mhm.
because it applies to what you're going through.
Yeah.
Um, so I do a weekly seance. My great grandfather did seances in Chicago
Oh,
during the
wow.
1920s and 30s.
Okay.
And so he did them during the week. And I've been doing them on Sunday nights because that works for me. But now, after, golly, 8 years, I think 8 years, I'm on my 8th year. Um, They come in buses. They come on, like ghost wagons
Yeah.
sometimes. They
Incredible.
come and the trippiest part is that every now and again I see a tunnel down the street from me that opens up and they just walk into it and then walk to the house. And
Yeah.
so my house has become an exit place for spirits that just want to move on.
Yep.
And it's not because they can't do it on their own, but because there's like a miscommunication that happens sometimes when they've been on the earth too long. they're part of the veil. They're part of
Yeah.
the afterlife because they're without a body.
Yeah.
However, they like to be called living adjacent, by the way, and I've been told they don't like to be called dead because they're not, because their souls are still alive. So
Yeah.
these living adjacent will show up because they just need a little help to go back to their family, or go beyond the veil is what I call it.
Yeah.
And so I've had them show up from all over the place, all over.
Yep.
There was a couple of guys that showed up a few years ago that had been kidnapped from somewhere, and my husband and I still have not figured out what country they were from.
Oh my
But
God.
they were, I could draw a picture of their clothes and tell you exactly what they look like. But they were brought in a ship, and they died in the ship that they were in. There was very little daylight.
Yeah.
And they don't know how long they traveled because they lost track of night and day because they didn't see daylight all the time.
Yeah.
And so when they got off the ship, they were actually dead. And so their first time being off the ship, they saw their bodies thrown out with all these other bodies on the ground. And it took them years as ghosts to learn how to communicate because nobody spoke their language. They were from another country.
Yeah.
And they were so amazing. They were so gracious and so polite and so loving. And they were like, it's done. We just don't know what happened. They don't know who picked him up. They don't understand what took place. But they ended up making a life for themselves, traveling around this part of the country and figuring out where they were. It took them years to figure out all these details because no one spoke their language.
Yeah.
And then, it was just an incredible story. And just, I don't know where they were from.
Yeah.
They weren't of African heritage. They seemed to be some kind of Hispanic heritage or Spanish, possibly. I thought for a moment they might be Aztec, and they shook their heads and said, no, they weren't Aztec. But they had that kind of haircut where they had like their hair was cut really high up on their forehead.
Yeah.
And then I saw, they had bands around their heads that were real thin, and just their clothing and stuff. No shoes, of course, but it was incredible. And they were two brothers, and, one of them had cut his finger and got infected and died from that. And then the other one died from some kind of respiratory issue, but it was incredible. I mean, ghosts go through a ton of experiences when they pass.
Yeah.
And so anything we can do to help them communicate. I have one that I love that's in my town where I live in Washington State, and I call him the Bridge Ghost. And back in the early 1920s, he was in an old Model A traveling, and the next thing he knew, he was on the ground, dead.
Oh no.
He got in a car wreck, and he doesn't know what happened, but he likes to stay on the bridge because he can see the water. And he can see everything going on in the town. You can see downtown from that. And he just likes to watch stuff. And so like once in a while I'll drive by and he'll go, this little kid lost their shoe. Can you believe it? They left their shoe here, or they threw it out of the car, and here it is. And he cracks me up. And he'll wave. We went by yesterday and he waves at me. He's darling. I just love him. But he came to the house once and just kind of chatted with me and said, hi, I when you go by, it's me. I'm the guy at the bridge. And I just love them. They're darling. They're too fun. And we got our locals, that hang out from different things. It's amazing. I had a guy show up this last week. We have a paper mill. We have, paper mills all over.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this guy, oh man. So like my husband, Doug, his dad and brothers and everybody worked the paper mill growing up. And I'm describing, I said, this guy had some kind of injury, and he showed me what happened. He lost his arm in a very gruesome manner in a piece of equipment. And my husband's like, oh yeah, that's the da-da-da. And he's rattling. And I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, it happened all the time. And I was like, gross. Ew. Oh my God. That sounds terrible. And like, anyway, not to be too graphic, but yeah. So this really sweet guy, and he's like, yeah, it chewed up my arm, blah, blah, blah. And I went, whoa, but it ended up killing him eventually. They saved what was left of his arm, and he lived a little while after that, but then died from complications of that afterwards. But he stays. This is the cool part I should get to. So there are guys that died in the mill, ladies and guys that have died in the mill from accidents, and they decided to stay to help the people that are there now. And so they will whisper in their ears, watch out, or stop, or wait, anything they can just to make sure that nobody else gets hurt there. But that's like their thing. They're very adamant about that's their goal. There was a man that was in his 30s that died last year. I still don't know what happened, but he had a family. He had a couple of kids and a wife, and he literally died at the mill from something that happened. I don't know what happened, but that's not uncommon. Any big industry, car manufacturers, miners, those things happen. It's miserable that they do, but it's part of life in an industry, I guess. And so, but it tickled me to no end that these spirits took it upon themselves that they could have gone on, they could have moved on and done their, but they decided, no, they're going to stay until the mill closes. They're going to be there just to help people. So I love getting to know spirits and hearing their stories because they say the most incredible things.
Yeah, the stories I've heard from my soldiers are just unreal.
Oh, I bet.
I have an inner circle of 8 of them that protect me. I call them my guardian angels, but I can't even say they were my first date because eventually I've got all of them, but like the ones that are with me are the ones that kind of decided to stay with me. And the first one that I had, he was the very first soldier I picked up when I was 12. I didn't even know about him until 2021 when he finally like introduced himself, and I finally like understood my abilities and was able to like understand that I can do this kind of stuff. And it was incredible because after him, then it became 2, and then it became 3, and then all of a sudden you have a whole army at my house. It's ridiculous.
Well, and I was going to ask you because I keep hearing the name Steven. Somebody keeps saying Steven. And I'm seeing somebody on your left that's been standing like this, and he has a really heavy duty mustache and brown hair. And he's just staring. He's just very somber looking, and he's just staring, but he's watching all these. Not sure what we're doing, but
yeah, that's funny you mentioned him. So he's
wearing blue. I see him wearing blue. Looks like
interesting. So that actually brings me to a story I should probably incorporate. So
okay, maybe he's been waiting. I don't know.
Probably. There's a couple of them that are younger and some are older, and they're stubborn. I learned that quickly. They're stubborn. But from what I learned through ancestry, readings and doing spiritual readings on myself and having friends help me with it, I've learned that my connection bloodline to the Civil War is apparently some way, shape, or form a descendant of General Thomas Jackson, Stonewall Jackson.
Okay.
I don't know if that's true or not. I had to somehow find a way to do DNA to find my birth parents and then trace it from there.
Okay.
But that's one of the supposed rumors. And another one was I'm a direct descendant of 6 brothers that came over from Ireland, and somewhere in the early mid 1800s. And when they came over, they basically just said, "Hey, nice knowing you," and they just all went their own way. And I had 2 that stayed in New York City. One of them actually came here to Pittsburgh, supposedly. And then I had one that went to Virginia and one that went to Atlanta. And I can't remember, those are the only ones I really knew of because they were the ones that, fought in the war.
Okay.
And the ones that were from New York and Pittsburgh ended up being mustered into the Irish Brigade. And to those that don't know much about history or the Civil War, we had an entire brigade of Irish immigrants from New York, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania. And when I've learned that, I was like, that's incredible because like I've always looked up to them. Like I love their story. I love everything about, the Irish heritage, being an Irish born child myself, it's kind of something I've always, took a lot of pride in. And learned about the commanders and how it became, actually ironically where Stonewall got his name at the First Battle of Manassas is where more or less the brigade was formed in a way because there was the 69th New York State Militia fought alongside another New York regiment. And the gentleman you're seeing, he he was just a captain at the time, but that's where he kind of like made a name for himself in helping rally the men, and they were one of the only Union regiments to actually break the Confederate line and actually do some kind of damage and hold a position during that first battle.
Wow.
After that battle, the state militia then became the 69th New York Infantry, and he was
Nice.
promoted to colonel. And then he said, "You know what? There's a lot of us, meaning Irish in New York, Pennsylvania, all around." He actually made a petition to the United States government to say, "Can I, raise my own brigade of Irish, immigrants?"
Hmm.
And the government was actually unsure of it at first because they didn't want like religion and whatever to pull people away from like the greater cause. But they said, "You know
Right.
what? I bet this probably be a good idea. They might all fight better." He
If
was
they have a cause.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then he was given his commission as general and founded the Irish Brigade of 3 regiments out of New York City, and then eventually got the 116th Pennsylvania from Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and the 20th Massachusetts from Boston. And he was the commanding general, Thomas Francis Marr. He was the commanding general of the Irish Brigade from 1861 to 63 when he resigned.
Because I was just going to say, he keeps nodding his head and saying the number 23, and he's smiling.
Yep.
23, like it's a big deal. And I thought, okay, I don't know what that means, but okay.
23, I think, is the engagements he was in. I'd have to double check the number, but the
Okay.
Irish Brigade was very, 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 very heavily involved. They were at every single battle that took
Nice.
place in the Eastern Theater. Never, like, granted, some of them they were just in reserve and didn't really like fight,
Hmm.
but they were there at every single battle.
Wow.
And I think that they started with 3,000 men between the 5 regiments.
Right.
By the Battle of Gettysburg in July of 1863, they only had 600 men.
Wow. Yeah.
And it just blows my mind because when you think in military numbers, a regiment should have 600 to 1,000 men.
At least.
And we're talking 600 men between 5 regiments. That
Yeah.
means some were dwindled down to the size of a company of just 50 odd people.
Right. Which
And
is nothing.
it
Yeah.
blows my mind to even think about how what they went through for one, because
Right.
they got slaughtered at a couple different battles because they're stubborn. We're
Yeah.
Irish, stubborn. They
Yeah.
didn't want to give up. So
Right.
fortunately, they took some of the heaviest casualties in some of the battles, but they didn't stop being proud of themselves and their cause, and
Right.
that goes all over from the Southern Confederates. There were Irish. There's a lot of famous Irish-born Southern soldiers as well, but
Hmm.
they're all stubborn and fought to the very bitter end, and
Right.
it's
Yeah. They
incredible.
were very determined.
Mhm.
Definitely.
And
So
they're
tell me,
tell.
with all of this stuff that you started at the beginning of COVID and all of these, you've gone through a lot of transitions, it sounds like, and you've had a lot of experiences, really.
Yep.
Um, what are you most proud of right now? When you look at everything that you've done, what do you think of when you think, wow, that was really cool. I love that I did that. What is that thing?
Two things for me to be Ghost Mob, and honestly, what you see around me is all the soldiers that they're my pride and joy. People think I'm crazy for it, but they genuinely make me happy. They're family to me. If I didn't have them, I wouldn't have anyone really. I bicker with them, they bicker with me. They do stuff to scare the living daylights out of me. And it brightens my day when I'm having a bad day. It gives me reason to travel because I like following their footsteps. But
Right.
as a greater whole, I would have to say the top thing that makes me more proud is the history travels to meet new soldiers. It's just an incredible thing to do. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
have you been tracking them? Do you have like a list of ones that you've located that you
Yeah,
found?
I've got a list on my phone. I think it's up to about 30 of them that I was able to find their names, regiments, all that. Some of
Nice.
them just regiments. Because getting older and busy with work, and same thing with my best friend. We don't have time to sit and FaceTime and really
Right.
dive, just random Joes. But everywhere I go, I say, I apologize if I can't get every little detail from you, but if you want out of here, you're welcome to come. And I,
Right.
only rule is respect me, respect my family, and the same thing will be given to you. I respect you in your space and your time.
Right. Right.
And a lot of times they just come and camp out here. My outside of my house is just a military camp,
Yep.
and they come and get away for a couple of days, then go back or travel, do whatever they do.
Right.
If they want to talk, they'll come in, and if I'm available, I'll sit down and talk with them. See what they have to say, then
Right.
go wherever. But it's awesome to have my 8 because they're the ones that like bring everything together, keep everything together, keep me sane, and I hope I keep them sane, even though some of them I question. But it's incredible. It really is.
It is.
I've
Well,
even
it's
talked to a former president,
nice.
just out of the blue. So, and Union General as well, U.S. Grant.
Nice.
He showed up one night, and I was just like starstruck. I was like, okay, I'm talking to a president. That's cool.
Right? That would be kind of shocking.
Yeah. Talked to him. I've talked to, Stonewall. He's actually one of my 8.
Mhm.
I've talked to several other generals and, higher ranking officers and just anybody that wants to talk. And the bond that I've grown with them is to the point where, like, when I go back to battlefields now that I've met them, it's almost like an emotional thing. Is quick bit. Last October, I went back to Gettysburg,
Mhm.
and one of my closest, that's my second closest, I should say, he was killed in the last day of battle, and he was from North Carolina, and I was standing at the North Carolina monument, to say a prayer for him, just kind of honor his memory, and
Right.
I told him I was going, but I didn't want him to like get emotional because he's like me. Like the second like stuff like that happens, the waterworks start flowing.
Right.
Um, it was real quiet. There was like only a couple other families there. I waited for them to walk away. Then I walked up and, just said a quick prayer for him. Just to stand there looking over the battlefield, over the field, and just imagining, this huge wave of, men just walking to their deaths.
Right.
I just had a hard time just kind of taking it all in. And I heard like just real light footsteps come up behind me, and I felt a hand on my shoulder. And all he said was, "You actually came."
Yeah.
And I turned and went, it was like I take it. I'm like, keep it.
Yeah.
You're okay. It was like, but it was emotional because I don't get. They always thank me every day, like, for talking to them, everything. But actually getting that interaction on the place that I found them at was like, it was just a lot. And I got back to the car, and my girlfriend looked at me and goes, "Is it okay?" And I went, "No." And I just started bawling. I couldn't believe that happened. Like, it was just so special.
But Sage, you got to know that men from those era were taught never to show their feelings,
Yeah.
never to express fear or anything else for that matter that wasn't stoic.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they get to let it all hang out and talk to you
Yeah.
and you acknowledge what they went through, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's very healing. So
Yeah.
you're doing a lot more than you realize just by being around them. And support, everybody needs support and everybody needs acknowledged. And a lot of times I find spirits aren't ready to pass until they get to say their story.
Yeah.
They want someone to know why they lived or what they felt. They need that last chapter to be closed
Yeah.
before they can let go and go on to something else.
Yeah. And that's why there's never any hard feelings to any of them if they
Right.
decide that they want to move on. But it's kind of funny that a lot of them actually decide to stay because they have a good time interacting with everybody. And I always laugh because like some people will only get Confederates, and some people may only get Union, and then there's my
Right.
bunch where I have both.
Right.
And everyone always asks me, like, well, how do you have both? They shot at each other. I said, because they don't see it as the war going on anymore. We're all
They
friends.
don't. They were brothers. A
Yeah.
lot of them were very, very close, either by blood or neighbor or marriage. They were even related in many cases.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the war people think it was in a lot of ways. It's
Yeah.
very different.
Yeah.
Okay, so for just a moment, let's stop for a second. And for people that are listening that aren't able to see the screen right now, can you please share with the listening audience how people can reach you if they want to talk to you or ask you questions?
Yep, absolutely. So I'm on Facebook at Sage Gatto, SageGatto. You could also reach me on the Teams page that I created and operate and run on TikTok and Instagram. It's at Still City Ghost Chasers. That is STEEL City CYTY Ghost Chasers. GHOSTCHASERS. It's kind of a long handle, but that's my easiest way of contact, especially on TikTok. I try to go live from ghost hunts, travels, whether it's battlefields, asylums, wherever I'm at. I try to go live and share with everybody. Obviously, service depending, but I'm always on my phone and whatnot. Just scrolling. So if anybody has questions, very easy to get a hold of me.
Nice. That is awesome.
Yep.
Well, I just have to thank you, Sage, and I'm going to have to have you come back because you have a lot of stories. I think we just barely hit the surface.
We scratched the surface on like the topics, but I could talk for hours, especially about the soldiers and
heck yeah. So we'll have to do that. I have a soldier story I'll tell you another time too. That's awesome. So hang on for just a second. For everyone listening and watching, this is Holly from Holly's Pandorium. And we had Sage Gatto here today of Steel City Ghost Chasers out of Pittsburgh area. Thank you, Sage, so much for coming on today. This was really fun. And we're definitely going to have to do this again soon because you've got some great stories. I love it.
Oh, yes.
This is Holly and Sage saying thank you. Thank you for watching and listening. And I'll be with you again soon. Hang in there and enjoy your popcorn and watch the next video. Oh, don't forget to like and share. I have to remember. Thanks. Thanks.